And a very big thank you to our presenter, Kurt Wilson, who is not only stop sharing, going to be our presenter, but I do have a brief bio to read. He is, among being the past executive director of AIA Oregon, he founded Wilson Architecture to bring together two equally important aspects of architecture, design and collaboration. For more than 25 years, including 20 years as principal and owner at Pivot, Kurt has partnered with clients and communities to design new public and commercial buildings, modernize existing buildings, support construction, plan for local bonds, and more. His creativity, strong work ethic, and cooperative approach result in places of pride for people in the Pacific Northwest. Kurt has been in leadership roles for the AIA for more than 20 years and currently serves on the Wildfire Authority Budget Committee. He lives in Eugene and is a licensed architect in Oregon, Washington, and California. And without any further ado, Kurt, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. I'm going to share a screen, folks. So if someone can give me a thumbs up if you're seeing my screen, that would be really useful. Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got a ton of slides I'm going to go through relatively quickly. You're going to be expected to read a lot of information on the slides because I'm not going to say everything that you're looking at here. So we are here to talk about wildfire and resiliency. And I think what's important here to remember is that wildfires are increasing in their impact, their size, the amount of land and structures that they're burning, the time of year that they're burning, and the resources that they're taking for firefighters. This is a trend that's been happening for more than 10 years, and there's no reason to believe that this is not something that will continue to grow in similar rates that we've seen before. This is information from EPA that speaks to this. You'll notice that there are some website references at the bottom of a lot of these slides, and these slides will be available later. But we just are seeing it's documented what we all see, which is that wildfires are a greater risk on the West and other places. It's also, I think, pretty well understood that there's a relationship between climate change, drying and warm conditions, and wildfires. And so again, wildfire resiliency is really important because this is part of life in the West. And I'm going to be I would appreciate if you would think about your roles here in listening to this information as both a design professional and as a community member. We're going to talk about some information that will help you be a better advisor to your clients, hopefully there's something in here that will help you grow your technical proficiency as it relates to building systems. But we also need to think about our roles as advocates for public policy that we want to see, and also volunteers in helping our neighbors. So there's a little bit of all of those things in here, and I just hope you think of it from that perspective. These are the learning objectives that Heather showed earlier, and I'm going to go through these 4 parts. We're going to talk about the trauma of fire, and we're going to focus on the Holiday Farm fire that happened in Lane County, public policy and requirements that are occurring more recently and starting to affect some things which we'll talk about, fire hardening standards, and then living with smoke, the ongoing prevalence in our lives as we see more fires. And why am I speaking about this? Heather mentioned some of my roles as practicing architect, and I was the executive director. I have been involved, prior to being the executive director for AIA Oregon, I was legislative chair for AIA Oregon for about 20 years. So advocating at the state public policy level is something I have a lot of experience with. I was executive director in 2019 through 2021. So throughout the period of COVID in 2020 when wildfires occurred. So in that role as executive director, I had a lot of interaction with some of the communities affected by the fires. I'm also currently the architect for the McKenzie Valley Wellness Clinic in Blue River, which is a fire rebuild. And I'll show a little bit about that project. I'm also the architect for improvements at the Willamette Activity Center in Oak Ridge, which has some resiliency components to it as well. So let's talk about the Labor Day fires of 2020 because they were so consequential for our experience with fire and policy. And this relates to my role as executive director, and again, why I'm speaking about this. These are the sections of AIA Oregon, and these are the fires that were started at Labor Day of 2020. They happened throughout Oregon. All of our sections at the time were affected. There was a period, I think it was the Wednesday after the Labor Day, the Monday Labor Day holiday, where a large percentage of the state was under some level of emergency evacuation order. Some of the most consequential fires were the Holiday Farm Fire in Lane County, the Alameda Fire in the Talent, Phoenix, Southern Oregon area, and the Beachy Creek Fire east of Salem. We're going to focus mostly on the Holiday Farm Fire, but it's worth noting all of those fires and their impact and their recoveries are different. The Alameda Fire started in outside of Ashland, and it blew more north and went through Talent and Phoenix, was fairly devastating through those areas. It followed the I-5 corridor and also followed the Bear Creek corridor, which follows I-5 through there. There was a significant number of residential structures and commercial structures lost. There was also a lot of mobile home parks that were lost, and I've lost track of what's been rebuilt. But some of the structures, and one of the recurring themes here is that in a fire, some of the structures that are so many of our people in our communities are dependent for low-income alternatives are lost and not necessarily adequately insured and therefore aren't rebuilt. So we'll just kind of keep thinking about this as a housing problem. The Holiday Farm Fire, though, is the one I'm going to focus on. Holiday Farm Fire occurred on in the McKenzie River Valley. It started just outside of Rainbow. If you recall that weekend, it was an unusual weather forecast because our normal weather patterns are winds blow from the ocean and to the east, and therefore that moisture from the ocean is carried in that wind. We had a red flag warning, which is the first time I remember hearing about a red flag warning. We had winds blowing east to west, so it was a drier wind, and the winds picked up. The fire started, you can see there's an orange dot on the right-hand side in the east, and then just blew and just went at a very rapid pace down the McKenzie River corridor in the valley and devastated Blue River and these communities. It didn't take, wasn't a lot of moving around and hopscotching around, which a lot of fires do. Most everything in its path, particularly at the beginning, was pretty well devastated. A lot of images like this of Blue River. It burned about 170,000 acres. 541 structures were destroyed. And I think these are houses. Saw another statistic right before the meeting started. It had over 1,000, but let's use 571 structures were destroyed. As of July of this year, 191 structures have been rebuilt, and there are currently 62 that are either in construction or permitted. So after 4 years, we're about 50%, a little bit more than 50% of what's been rebuilt. And that's an important, it's important to remember with fires, it takes a long time to rebuild these communities. We think about the phases of recovery, which you see on the screen here. The first few happen in the few weeks to months, but really that recovery period takes so long. Most of us who are in Oregon remember the Holiday Farm Fire or the Alameda Fire, whatever the fires were. Politicians and policymakers remember them when they happen, but the duration of rebuild takes so long that we've all moved on to other things. And so it's important to remember the challenges for those who are suffering and who have loss in fires and the trauma that they've experienced, and the difficulties of rebuilding, particularly rural communities. So there has been recovery and rebuilding occurred. So there's some, I go up there a lot because I have not only the clinic project, but I have another residential project. going on. One of the things that the fire did was because there's so many loss of trees, it opened up the view corridors up in the valley and along the river. You see a lot more than you used to see, and there's just a tremendous number of houses. Many have been rebuilt that are along the corridor, and I would suspect that many of them have been rebuilt that you see along the river because they were adequately insured. And that's an important point here that'll keep coming up. I'm going to focus a little bit more specifically on Blue River. Blue River is a unique community, somewhat of a historical community along the river with a relatively defined downtown core. This is an image taken from looking back towards the river across portions of Blue River, and this was this photo was taken from where the site plan or the map was taken from. What you see here is that some of the social infrastructure elements have been rebuilt. The library and clinic are wrapping up construction. The fire station is complete and occupied. A post office was built and been operational relatively quickly after the fire. So there is some infrastructure in place in Blue River. The fire station, this is the fire station. This was taken on Wednesday. This is the fire station on the left and the clinic on the right. Pivot did the fire station and the library, and the clinic project is a project I'm involved in. So those things are happening to help the community regrow. But there's also a lot of lots here that have not been built. This particular lot that you see in this is a location of where a market will be, which is an important part of the Blue River community, and it's hopefully will get rebuilt. They're in permitting now, and hopefully the construction will happen. But it's a long, slow slog to rebuild community after fire occurs. But at this point, 4 years in, this is really about a housing production challenge, and either some level of barriers or multiple barriers have occurred for people not to be able to build at this point. In some ways, one of the things I want us to remember is that we're going to talk about wildfire resiliency, but it overlaps so many aspects of advocacy positions that AIA, Oregon, and architects feel. This is fundamentally, as I said, at this point, a housing production issue. And the governor's Housing Production Advisory Council has been working for the last year. Earlier this year, made their recommendations report. There are about 59 recommendations, but there are a handful of recommendations in that report that overlap with the challenges of rebuilding from a fire, and particularly in the Holiday Farm fire recovery. Permitting challenges has been a significant issue for a lot of people. And just, the permitting process. Keep in mind that the Holiday Farm fire occurred again in September of 2020. We were working from home. The building department staff was working from home. Lane County at the time was not accepting permits digitally. There were a lot of barriers in place that aren't necessarily in place anymore, but there are still many barriers related to planning and development and permitting in through our systems in place, particularly as they affect counties and unincorporated communities. The last one I think is also really important, and that is the labor and the staff and people to the capacity to be able to build. That's been another issue that has affected the McKenzie River Valley in terms of just getting a builder to go upriver and build. Fundamentally, this is about financial support. You can overcome a lot of problems, but if you don't have the ability to rebuild your house or your business, you're not going to rebuild. And that's, that 50% of the houses that have not been rebuilt, how many of those are never going to be rebuilt? How many people are not coming back to the community? And that's a loss for important communities in rural Oregon, and it's a real concern that I have. There are some things that are going on. I'm not going to speak too long on these, and there's a lot of information that could be shared, and hopefully you'll find, if you're interested, we can help you find some resources. But The McKinsey Community Land Trust has been set up in the area to construct initially six houses on a community land trust system. And that is the community land trust will own the land, and individuals can buy the houses. So it's not only a way to get some houses developed, but it also is a lower entry point for people to be able to get into home ownership. As I mentioned, mobile home parks in a lot of particularly rural communities and smaller communities are an important option for housing for members of our communities. And the Lazy Days RV Park was destroyed in the fire. This is a little bit east of Blue River, and Homes for Good is working on a project. And I don't know when this photo was taken exactly. I think it's much further along than this, but of rebuilding Lazy Days to be able to get more opportunities for people to be able to rebuild or to be able to have a place to live. And they're through the funding from HUD, through the state of Oregon, of our community development block grant disaster recovery funds have been set up, and to try and assist people. It's important to remember that there's FEMA can step in and does step in post-emergency situations, and FEMA will provide funding to rebuild your house. Unfortunately, if you have any level of insurance, you're not eligible for their funding. And most of us are underinsured. When we took out our insurance policies, it was probably, maybe it was adequate at the time our insurance policy was taken out, but with the cost of construction inflating at such a high rate, probably not adequate now for any of us, probably, I guess. Hopefully that's not the case. Some of us might have the ability to supplement that ourselves, but for so many people affected by these fires, their level of insurance isn't adequate to cover their cost of rebuilding, nor does it allow them to be eligible. So some of these programs are helping them become eligible for funding. So we're going to move on. As soon as I'm going to go through this other section, and then if there's any questions, we'll take a quick break and take those questions. So let's talk a little bit about some of the public policy laws and some other things that went into effect at the time or since these fires have occurred. In particular response to these fires, one of the important laws that occurred in 2021 was Senate Bill 405, which extended the period of from 12 months to 60 months when these houses or these buildings, I'm kind of focusing on housing because that's primarily what it was, but businesses as well, but could be rebuilt meeting the standards that was in place when the structures were built. So that idea of non-conforming use. And again, land use laws change. If your house was built prior to the early 70s, then you may not have met land use requirements. You may have drain fields that don't meet current standards. There's a lot of, think about how rapidly codes are changing. So non-conforming uses, many structures would be a non-conforming use if they were constructed now. What's important about this is that it takes time to rebuild, and 5 years is a pretty good benchmark, although as we see, it's not necessarily long enough. The unfortunate thing about this legislation, from my perspective, is that this was very specifically written around the Labor Day 2020 fires. And it was not written to acknowledge that there will be a lot more wildfires and more natural disasters. And so, when the next fire comes, for people to get the extension of time to 60 months, more legislation is going to be necessary because of the decisions that were made at that time to lock it into that particular event. There's another decision that was made that's been pretty consequential for many people building, and that is, and I couldn't find the actual legislation, but it's related to House Bill 5006. 5006 actually provided some incentives for people to build, meet current energy standards. And the reason for that was that there was a companion legislation at the time that actually allowed people to rebuild at, I think, a 2008 code or 2012 code. So you were not only did we have non-conforming use that affecting land use and some other things, but you also didn't need to rebuild your structure to current code. And that's why this incentive was put in place. I think these are important public policy decisions that we should be thinking about in terms of what we want rebuilds to look like and what we want our communities to look like, because sometimes they might be in conflict with each other. A couple of other things specific to the Holiday Farm fire in Lane County, that it was very difficult to rebuild, particularly in the first few months, the time of the year, the issues related to work from home environment and whatnot, navigating the permitting process. As an architect who does a lot of work in Lane County, navigating the permitting process is not easy. If you're aren't in a position to be able to hire a design consultant, and trying to do this yourself is very difficult. Lane County created a position called the permit navigator, and that the person who was in that role was specifically brought on to help people get through the permitting process and what's happening next, what's the steps, what's the information that you need to bring to be able to continue to move forward, and also help them get access to other resources. They also, about 5 or 6 months after the fires, decided to waive permitting fees as a way to lower barriers for people to get permitted. And this is a time restricted waiver, essentially. At some point, I believe this year, I haven't been able to pin down the specific date, this waiver will be rescinded, and people then who haven't rebuilt will be expected to pay fees with everything else. Associated with that was also you got priority in the permitting process. So in terms of the permit turnaround time, for someone with a lot of projects in Lane County, and some of them not related to Holiday Farm fire, this cuts both ways. And presumably, if someone got to move forward in the line, other people took a little bit longer to get their permit. So again, this is an issue that we need to think about in terms of how it affects all of us in the broader development process. So what you've heard probably more about, and it's kind of a more recent development, or moving towards a more recent finality, I guess I'll say, is the development of policies related particularly to the wildland urban interface mapping system that's going to go into effect and will trigger other requirements. Senate Bill 762 was passed in 2021. It provided a lot of legislation, but it was intended to address some key goals: creating fire adaptive communities, developing safe and effective response, and increasing the resiliency of Oregon's landscape. So we're going to talk about the mapping, but there were a lot of other aspects of this bill. Most departments were charged with setting up some kind of a work group or task force to develop how they could effectively improve their delivery model to address one or all of these requirements. I was on a DLCD user group related to creating fire adaptive communities. I think primarily what came out of that was more about fire responsiveness and thinking about access points to and from properties to be able to get people in and out, or well, in a wildfire situation, people evacuating or going one direction and the fire response are coming another. And we've got a lot of 2-lane highways. How are we doing that? And how is that particularly getting onto properties was a big part of what the land use code was looking at in that work group. So more specifically, the wildland urban interface is a statewide map of wildfire risk, and it was intended to really identify that wildland urban interface boundary, which gets referred to as WUI. Some defensible space standards will go into effect based on the map. It was initially rolled out relatively quickly after 20, I think it was sometime in 2022. Its rollout was was generally poorly executed and more than anything, I think it was poorly received. And the map was actually pulled back, and another law was changed or was created in 2023, Senate Bill 80. One of the things that it did is change risk to hazard. And the point here was that one of the reasons why it was so poorly received is people saw this map and said, we're upset that the state was telling the insurance industry that their property was of greater risk, as though the insurance industry didn't have this information or wasn't aware of it. So I think a lot of the reaction to the rollout of the map was unfortunately a reflection of some of the politics that we see in the world we're in. But you know, it's kind of gone through. The map was reevaluated and has been released in draft form earlier this year. And the expectation is by October 1st of 2024, the map will be a final version of the map will be published, and then the rules that are based on this map can start to also move forward. There's a website link in relatively small text to the Oregon Explorer app that shows you this dynamic mapping tool. And again, this will be available on the slide. The purpose of the map is listed here to provide some education, also help us understand where hazard zones are, and then we'll be triggered to defensible space standards as well. A screenshot of the map for the state, you'll see that there are only really 4 colors: low, moderate, and high hazard. And you can see, you know, if you understand the geology or the topography of Oregon, it's pretty well reflected as to where the low, moderate, and hazards are. The map is really quite an impressive tool. It gets down to the property level and shows our hazards. The property in the middle happens to be my house. So we can see individual properties. You can also see where properties are overlapping in those low to moderate and high to moderate standards or locations. So if you haven't seen it, it's worth looking at. And again, if you Google Oregon Explorer wildlife interface, wildland urban interface map, you probably will be able to find it. So it's going to, one of the things that it will do is it will trigger some defensible space requirements. There will be different requirements based on the hazard zones, and they will be managed through the Oregon State Fire Marshal's office. What is, I think, important to point out here is that not only do these standards, not only are these standards applied to design and construction standards, but they are also really about maintenance and operational standards, keeping vegetation, you know, managing vegetation and things like that. So it's going to affect every property, which is not in, you know, not a lot of that long dry grass requirements are in place now, and mowing is being required. But this will kick up more requirements to maintain a defensible space than we are seeing now, and will require everybody to cooperate in this regard. One other important public policy development is the, I don't know if it's a creation, but it's more rules around public safety power shutoffs, also referred to as PSPS. This new rules were adopted by the Oregon Public Utility Commission in September 2022. And these apply to utilities. They are intended to require utilities to shut down power under certain weather conditions to reduce the chances of sparking causing wildfires. Now, the holiday farm fires, my understanding is there's yet to be an official declaration of the cause, but there is current litigation in place with some utilities related to, and with Bonneville related to the cause of the fire and whether it was a transmission line or not. And so what's important here is that there will be days, and we had one where I'm a little bit west of Eugene, and we had one last year where the conditions were right for a public safety shut off, and we had power was shut down for about 24 hours. It was a smoky day. There wasn't any fire. Thankfully, there was no fire. But we are going to see more and more days where we are going to have loss of power to communities completely. Probably those days are going to be hot and smoky. And so as we live through those days, we're going to have to think about that. And we're going to touch about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end. So before I jump into fire hardening standards, if there's any questions about the information that I provided, I'm not seeing everything, Heather and Colleen, but if there are any questions, it would be great to take them now.
There's not anything in the chat, but if anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or put your questions in the chat box.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. We'll have some time at the end. So fire hardening standards are also part of the defensible space standards. This is from I think it's the Oregon State Fire Marshal's Office. Well, no, it's actually from the BCD website. And this makes reference to, yeah, I don't know that you can read this, but it does make reference to some of the fire hardening building code standards that will go into effect. It doesn't talk specifically, it doesn't identify specifically the standards, but they're not unlike what you're going to see here over the next few slides. What's important of what it says, it makes me laugh, but under the category of what homeowners need to know. And it says, if you are in a high hazard zone and in the wildland interface zone, no action is required at this time. But it does say that when the map goes into effect, those requirements will start to roll into place. And then if you're not in a high hazard zone, you're not going to have the same specific standards, but there are some guides and information available. So again, the rollout of this map is really critical to some of the requirements that we can expect. And because some of these standards are referenced in the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, if you're practicing in residential work, I would encourage you to find this website and become familiar with what those standards are that are going to be in code. So we're going to talk about some of the fire hardening standards that are commonly available and used and referenced. I think it's important to note that these are primarily recommendations for residential structures and homeowners. And they don't necessarily incorporate the level of building systems and envelope technologies that are beyond residential projects that many of us are working on in the commercial environment. But there's still important principles to understand. Oops, sorry about that. And they really are related to direct flame, radiant heat, and flying embers. It's a different, the risk of fire outside the building is somewhat different in terms of how it's being approached in standards than it is a fire that starts inside a building that our building codes are based on. So I'm going to provide a little bit of information on 4 standards. Firewires USA, developed by the NFPA. Prepare for wildfire, information from CAL FIRE. Wildfire hazard mitigation handbook from FEMA, and some research from IBHS. That's an insurance industry-based funded research group that's got a lot of really good information. So fire hardening standards from Firewires USA. Most of the information is primarily lives in websites, not necessarily in a series of PDF brochures. So you'll see near the bottom, right above the header, you'll see an address for these websites. A lot of information here, a lot of good information to review. One of the things on the Firewise USA website is fact sheets related to recommendations for design, construction, and operations. And they're organized here in the bulleted items on the left. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to show you the format of the information and a few examples. So when you click on any one of those hyperlinked bulleted items, you'll it'll pull up a PDF. These are a few under eave construction and roofing materials. You'll see under eave construction comes up a lot in fire hardening standards. And part of that is fire builds against the house, that heat buildup as the heat rises, the eaves and overhangs restrict the movement of the heat and therefore build up more heat. And so a recommendation that's fairly common is to minimize overhangs. Again, if you're looking at design considerations from a daylighting or from a passive cooling strategy, you're going to look at overhangs as a strategy to block the heat buildup. So we need to recognize that these standards or these recommendations are specific to one aspect of the things that we're working on. Also, the under eave standards, I do believe, is not necessarily related to what I can show. You're going to see a lot of references to minimizing ventilation, roof ventilation, which of course, if you're putting in bad insulation, you don't want to eliminate your air flowing over that bad insulation in the roof. What those standards are really looking at is minimizing embers getting pulled in through your house as those that heat builds up. And as the very nature of air moving from high or from low to high across the top of your insulation, that also provides a natural cavity for very hot air to blow across the ventilation of your roof. And so blocking embers with a screen or grill is really what those requirements are looking at. I am not aware of a specific mesh opening size has been recommended, and that's something to look into a little bit, but that's the concept there. Again, roofing materials, you're going to see, you don't necessarily see it in this page, but you're going to see the references to Class A roof standards. And I think that is something where that's one area of direct parallel between the building code and these fire hardening standards, where a Class A roof is the direction that you want to go to for fire hardening standards. These standards also get into things beyond the building. That previous slide had page 4. Well, I'm sorry, I'm bouncing around a little too much. But decking and fences and structures against the building. It's also ground covers. All of these standards really are advocating against using wood-based bark and materials as a ground cover and using rock or pumice or something that's not combustionable. And coatings. So there's some good information here. I encourage you to go to this website to look at this information. The intermediate non-combustible zone is where they're talking about not, some of these examples here are testing conditions showing how fast, particularly in this time of year where it's still so dry, a wood-based ground cover will ignite and then start to build up against the house, and that's causing the fire at the house itself. There's also a standard. There's some information about exterior sprinkler systems. I think you won't be able to read it on the screen, I don't believe, but it does say in the recommendations that this is only recommended as a supplement to all other fire hardening standards. Fire sprinklers are very effective inside buildings, less so the nature of a fire that's coming from outside the building. CAL FIRE has a great website. The Get Ready website has a lot of resources and pages, not a lot of great documents to pull off in a PDF. So I'd encourage you to go to that website, and the link is listed there. And then the FEMA Wildfire Hazard Mitigation Handbook for Public Facilities is actually dated 2008. I have not been able to find a more recent version, although I think there must be one. It's got a ton of information, and it is in a PDF. It breaks down in a lot of detail the elements of the building and the site as listed here. I'm just giving you a couple of examples of format of the information that you would see here. So this is talking about roof assemblies. So you're seeing a relatively easy to understand diagram, a description of mitigation measures, the effectiveness and design issues. So it's a really easy to read, quick way of understanding some different approaches to fire hardening strategies and how you can use those. Again, here's an example of minimizing the eave on buildings where possible. And then the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, IBHS, is a insurance industry funded research group. They do have operations in Portland, and they do a lot of testing. You can see there's a lot of really good information on their website to help us understand some of the technologies and building performance issues. I would say that a lot of the information that I've seen so far is really on those issues of ignition, initial ignition systems, and you're really trying to promote ignition resistant systems. They aren't necessarily looking at the duration of heat building through walls as we think of a fire rated assembly. I do understand that they are starting to test assemblies, kind of taking a broader view of testing assemblies, and things like the behavior of a ventilation system we might have in a rain screen where we've got good top and bottom ventilation to allow water to get out and away in our envelopes, and what that may or may not be promoting in terms of heat transfer and fire transfer in a wildfire-like setting. So hopefully there's some more information and some resources that can help us in that regard of thinking about those kinds of systems. So I went pretty quickly through the fire standards, and we still don't have a lot of time. Any real quick before I go on to living with smoke, any questions, comments?
Kurt, there was a question from Logan. It was a little bit ago, but he said, what groups and individuals drafted the wildfire hazard map? I don't know if you addressed that.
That's a fairly big, I think Oregon State was forestry. There was a lot of groups that were involved in that, and we can provide some more information. And off the top of my head, I don't know all the groups that were involved in that. I just know there were a lot of groups involved. Okay, let's talk with living with smoke. So I think it's if you're living in Southern Oregon, if you're in Lane County, in any part of Lane County, or anywhere in the Willamette Valley, you've had more than a few heavy smoke days in the last few years. So wildfires are certainly a risk and something we should be mitigating and planning for. But in terms of our day-to-day lives, living with smoke is probably more of a factor for most of us. And it's a relatively newer phenomenon to be living with smoke for greater amounts of smoke for longer periods of time. And when you couple that with public safety power shutoffs, our building systems could be disabled while we are living through smoke. No access to air conditioner, and those kinds of things. So that just makes life much more difficult. The McKenzie Valley Wellness Clinic is a rebuild in Blue River. This picture was taken on Wednesday. It will be open targeting mid to late October. It's a health clinic serving many patients throughout the McKenzie River Valley. So we're looking at the entrance. The space on the left is actually a community room, which is secondary to the clinic's activities, and it'll be used as a community center and also a shelter when necessary. And so one of the things that we've done on this project is we have incorporated a smoke mitigation system and a generator. into the building. So the idea here is that this building is operational. There's a public safety shutdown. The clinic can still operate if there's heavy smoke. This is a place people can go to get away. Our smoke mitigation system is a multi-stage system that is filtering out smoke and odors. We're also, so the way that this system is operating, all of our outdoor air is coming in through this heavily filtered system. It does require a booster pump. There's some additional costs to that. But it is something that we found. We had actually were able to get a grant and pay completely for the smoke mitigation system that's going on at the clinic now. So the clinic is a relatively small building. It's got 3 primary exam rooms. It's about 3,300 square feet, the floor plan that you see here. A relatively simple double-loaded corridor. The primary bar is the clinic, and then the space on the upper portion is the community room that we saw the image of. And our mechanical system, relatively simple, multiple air handlers that are serving zones. In this area, if you can see my screen, on the right-hand side down below is our air intake. And our smoke mitigation system is located up in the attic space, just at where that air intake is coming in. And it's really very simple. It's it's a really robust multi-stage filter. It has if you can see there, a first, second, and third stage filters of different materials that are filtering different particulates related to smoke and odor. And that's really the system. It got a little bit more maintenance, but it's just got more, and it's got some more costs in it. That the operation with our booster pump is going to require to use a little bit more energy. We did look at an option of having a separate switchable air intake system where we could, in a non-smoky day, run our air intake through a kind of a conventionally filtered system. So we weren't running the need for that booster pump all the time, but that just required, in this relatively small project, 2 air intake systems. And so we decided to go with one and always run our air intake through here. Our other project I'm going to highlight here is centered in Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge is East Lane County in the foothills of the Cascades. It's on its way to Willamette Pass on Highway 58. It is an area that just suffers with chronically with air inversions in the winter. It's historically had a lot of home wood fires for heat, and it just air quality in Oak Ridge is always very challenging. So that had been a winter problem in Oak Ridge, and now air quality has become a pretty pronounced summer problem in Oak Ridge with the number of wildfires around Oak Ridge. And wildfire smoke can travel hundreds of miles and affect the community. You can see here, this is some information. Some of this information is from EPA and from El Rapa Lane Regional Air Pollution Authority. And over about a 2-month period in 2022, more days were in the unhealthy to hazard period than they were in the good period in terms of air quality. And so it's a real issue for people living in Oak Ridge. You can see this chart is showing particulates in the air. That dash line, the red dash line that runs across the chart, is showing what a kind of a normal level of particulates in the air. And you can see Oak Ridge is always above that that normal or kind of acceptable level. And then, but in the last 10 years, it's just really had a significant number of days or times of the year where they've got just a lot of particulates in the air. So Oak Ridge is part of a grant that was received recently through from Lane County. This is an EPA grant, and it's funding the Lane County Resiliency Hub program. And there are resiliency hubs in 7 communities in Lane County, including Florence, Eugene, Springfield, Cottage Grove, Veneta, and Oak Ridge. And the purpose of the resiliency hubs are really to provide a community-based post-disaster recovery location, not just for wildfires, but other emergency situations and natural disasters. And to be able to provide not only the spaces for people to go, but also the training to be able to provide assistance during those periods of time. So if you're not aware of the Resiliency Hub program, you'll probably learn more because this grant was just recently received. But it's an ongoing effort of Lane County through Lane County Emergency Management in cooperation with other agencies. So the Willamette Activity Center in Oak Ridge is the Oak Ridge-based facility that will receive funding from the Resiliency Hub program. It's a project I've been working on since 2022. It's a former elementary school. It's been used for the last couple of decades as a center for social service agencies and a variety of them in Oak Ridge. Actually lost occupancy for some insurance related reasons a couple of years ago. It's got some chronic roof leaking that we're addressing now. But it received a lot of funding over the last couple of years to renovate the building. And not only to be the center for agencies that have been there before, but new agencies, but also has more of a resiliency hub. It's really well tied into Resiliency Hub and being a post-disaster and extreme weather center. And fundamental to that will be a generator and a PV system. So the WAC is a building, when you look at it, that only a preservationist could love. It doesn't look great from the outside. It really does have some really strong infrastructure components on the inside. It's fully sprinklered. It's got a good structural system. It's organized around, as an elementary school, it was a series of 3 classroom pod buildings connected by a covered walkway. There's plumbing distributed throughout the building. There's big rooms throughout the building. The gym, the cafeteria, all activity or spaces that with a little TLC can serve a variety of uses. It's also positioned just 1 block off the highway with a large parking lot that was a playground parking lot adjacent to it. Very flat site, very flexible to be able to serve a variety of needs in both the day-to-day activity and a post-disaster situation as well. So with through funding the Resiliency Hub and some other grants, we're looking at converting the building in the area on the lower left. This is Module C, the gym. We're going to be improving actually both Module C and Module A has funding for some seismic upgrades and other structural and finish upgrades. We're going to be adding behind the gym in what was the audit or the stage dressing areas. We're going to be putting in a series of individual shower and restrooms. So that gym would be used as a community center, a multi-day overnight community center, or an extreme weather center with increased number of showers and restrooms. The green area in Module A will become an emergency operations center that can do double duty as supporting economic development activities, small businesses, those kinds of things when it's not being used as an EOC. And the area that's not highlighted on the upper left is a generator location. We'll also plans for a health clinic in the building, of food bank moving back into the building. So the building is really intended to support the communities in a variety of circumstances throughout the year with the assistance of the Resiliency Hub funding. One of the things that we're also very excited about is we just recently received funding to install a large PV array system throughout this is about a 30,000 square foot building, and you can see the PV arrays are reflected here. Most of the roof is going to get solar on it. And the idea here is that we would be integrating the solar arrays with our generator so that we can power the building for multiple days, and certainly through our public safety shutoff periods of time, but also for prolonged weather outages, to be a place to be able to support people in Oak Ridge. Not only the social service activities that are going on, whether it's the health clinic or the food bank, but also a place for people to go. And so this is an important resiliency component, not only for wildfires, but other natural disasters. So I'm right at 1 o'clock. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to see, I was hoping to get done a little bit before then, but I want to just see if anybody has any questions or comments. And we are at 1, and I completely understand if people need to go, but if I'm going to stick around until, if anybody has any questions or comments.
Kurt, are you able to pull up your chat box? Because there are a couple of questions in there. I know Alan
Sure,
Scott has
hang on.
one.
Yes, okay.
And Kristen.
Let's see.
too. So I think the first question is from Paul. And then Kirsten has one and Alan. So are you
So,
able to see those?
Yeah,
Do you want me to read them?
Kirsten, the smoke mitigation is powered by the generator. So the generator, I assume you're talking about at the clinic project. The generator is a backup generator. So our primary emergency backup systems are not connected to the generator. That allowed us to get this generator incorporated in the building with a little less initial expense. But it is sized to be able to run the building, including the smoke mitigation system. I think it's also ironic that, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it's powered by propane. So I've been talking about fire hardening and ignition resistant, trying to minimize ignition resistant materials. Oh, by the way, we have a 1,000-gallon propane tank about 10 feet from the building. We have a really small site. We need a generator. We need some fuel to be able to support it. And so we got to make these trade-off decisions in this context. Alan, I'm going to... So Alan, you've got some questions. You might want to ask the question itself. In terms of the smoke mitigation system, we haven't got it operational yet. In fact, Monday, there will be a big day because we're troubleshooting some problems with it shutting off its breaker. So how it's actually performing, we don't know yet. But it's intended to filter as much of the smoke in order as we can. So maybe you could ask that question.
Well, yeah, thanks, Kurt. Just quickly, I understand that a lot of the hazard in smoke is not necessarily the particulate matter is bad too, but there's a lot of other nasty VOCs and stuff in that, and I'm wondering if that part of the 3-stage filter was designed to remove some of those other hazardous elements from the smoke, and not just particulate matter and odors.
That is my understanding, and but what exactly it wouldn't filter, I don't know.
Okay, and the second part of that was just that I'm sure that's an expensive system to both install and to operate. And so, are you going to have a normal mode and a smoke mode so that you're not pulling all the outside air through the 3-stage filters?
This is the only mode, and
okay.
So we're going to be running all the air through it. And so that's the addition of the booster pump allows us to pull through that a little bit better. So there's some cost in the booster pump. There's some cost in the energy of the booster pump, which energy uses of the booster pump which isn't too high. What we don't know yet is what the cost of the filters are.
Okay, thanks.
This is like I said, about a 3,300 square foot building. And the cost of this system was about an additional $17,000.
Okay.
So it's not that expensive to be able to run. We'll see how it is to operate.
Well, when you're talking about human health and how frequently we're going to need that. So,
right.
Great presentation. Thank you, by the way.
One of the other things that we've done, we weren't able to incorporate a vestibule in the lobby to meet the energy code requirements for a vestibule in its size. But we do have a vestibule on one of the side entrances. And so what the operational plan is that in a heavy smoke day, that we would be using the side entrance vestibule to be able to control people coming in and out, to also, kind of mitigate the smoke that's migrating into the building. So I see a few questions. I appreciate the nice comments. Thank you very much. Marcia, who applied for all the grants? that has been in the project in Oak Ridge. There is a community organization. It's been a coalition of nonprofits that have formed the WAC funding committee, and they've been meeting for about 2 years, meet every month, and they have a handful of people in their capacities in nonprofits who just keep an eye on grant opportunities, and applying for a ton of grants. I'm heavily involved in the grant application process. In a lot of ways, it's not different than submitting a proposal. You got to learn it. You got to kind of make sure you understand the requirements, but there's a lot of technical information that's needed. So that grant process, and this is a place I think providing advice and being an advisor to our clients is really important. Being able to support grant grant application activities is a big part of what I'm doing on that WAC project. But it's been really successful. I'm so happy for the community and what we've been able to see. Logan, I see your question about do the resiliency hubs anticipate PVs? And so let me answer that. The resiliency hubs are all going to be a little bit different, and they're not all based on the same model. The way that, as I understand it, the way that Lane County Emergency Management kind of reached out to different communities, they were looking to see where there are opportunities to be able to support this grant. They applied for a grant under this resiliency hub model. It's not a common model, but it also does exist in a few places. But again, you know, those goals that I showed of providing a place where people can go in a post-disaster situation and having some people who could help them is really the intent. And so, for instance, the facility in Veneta is pretty much ready to be operational. The WAC project is the largest improvement, as I understand it, or planned improvement of the resiliency hub funding. And our PV funding actually came from a different grant unrelated to the resiliency hub. Hope that answers your question. And I do see the backup generator, and the issue of generators and fuel capacity, and you know, we have a large generator we're planning on a large fuel tank. In the case for the project in Oak Ridge, it'll be a diesel generator. How much we can run off of that, I don't know that we really know that, because there's a lot of electric loads we don't know for the improvement for the building. But you know, the risk is, when are we going to be able to get a diesel fuel delivery? We don't know, right? When we get into a large situation, you just don't know how much fuel you're going to have. So having the PV system to be able to support that is a really great supplement to a generator. Jake, I see one more. The question about maximum roof overhangs, I don't think that there's, you know, I think that diagram that you saw of trying to minimize your overhangs were not necessary as, you know, that's about the most information I've seen. What I didn't highlight, which was in some of those standards, was having a finished soffit as opposed to exposed rafters, and being able to use the finish and maybe even the shape or the angle of your soffit to be able to redirect that heat buildup away from the building. So that's probably more important. To me, the idea of not having overhangs in a lot of in the Northwest is not an absolute recommendation. Overhangs have a lot of purpose. And so how we can shape our eaves to redirect that heat is probably the better way to think about it. Kirsten, the issue of codes and between what's happening in California and Oregon, Oregon is always going to follow California, but not to the same level that California is doing it. so I don't know what we will or won't. I can't tell you exactly. I'm not as up to speed with what's happening in California. I think the way that the rollout of the WUI hazard map happened is extremely disappointing, and it doesn't bode well for our ability to incorporate more standards. All that the 2021 legislation was requiring was, let's have a map that shows us where there are hazards. That's not very complicated in my mind. And then based on those levels of hazards, let's incorporate different standards. That's all it said. And then so the map was the trigger to a lot of other things happening. The fact that it took 3 years for that, or over 2 years for that to happen, and hasn't actually happened yet, just doesn't bode well for the way that things actually get done here. I hope that's not my takeaway comment from today, but it might be. So I see a lot of people are still there. Anybody, anything else? Well, I appreciate everybody's being on for this long, and it's nice to see a lot of names on the screen. It'd be nice to see some people here and say goodbye. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's
Thanks,
always
Kurt.
wonderful to have.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thanks, Kurt. That was awesome. Great presentation.
Thank you, Alan. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Have a safe weekend, and enjoy it.
Kurt,
Hi,
thank
Nir.
you so much. All right.
That was awesome.
Nira, you know, one thing I didn't mention, which I was going to do a whole segment on, was the house plan library idea. And that's probably a subject for another conversation. But for those who are on, Nir has on his website. So the idea of the house plan is that for those who are struggling to rebuild in a post-fire situation, just access to architects and access to design can be very challenging. It's just another cost and another barrier that people have. And there are just numerous examples of house plan libraries being available. Maybe the most developed that I'm aware of is as a result of the campfire in Paradise, California. In fact, ironically, I don't know if Jen is on, but there's a group called the Campfire Collaborative, which happens to be the name of a firm in Springfield. But they've developed a really, where they've hired architects to develop house plans, and then people can obtain these house plans. Nir, on his website, has house designs available for people. And I think that's fantastic. It just really simplifies the process to reduce some barriers for people to be able to rebuild. So Nir, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, sure. Like you said, housing production is basically one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. All the problems we've had all this time, now it's like quadrupled or multiplied 10 times. Like the housing production issue has become the core issue now.
Kirsten, that's Nir Perlson. So the NIR is the architect, and it's.
That's me. Thanks.
Yes. So
that was awesome, Kurt. Really good stuff.
All right. Great. I'm glad it was helpful. All right. Well, have a good one.
Let us know. Kurt, let us know if you want to do a follow-up presentation on anything. But thank you so much.
Yes.
It's a great presentation.
And Colleen, I didn't change anything from the presentation that you and Heather have the link to, so it's ready to go.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Okay, we'll get it up on the website.
All right.
All right. Bye, everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
Have a good one. Thank you.